Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me today is Obie Strickler, CEO of Grown Rogue. Thank you very much for joining me today, Obie.
Yeah, David, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to the discussion.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Obie, I always like to start the show with a little bit of background. What was it that brought you to the cannabis industry?
That's a long story, but always had a really kind of a passion for the plant. We're from Southern Oregon, which is, in kind of the Emerald Triangle. And so, cannabis has kind of been part of the culture here for a long time. Was a consumer in college, high school, was a collegiate basketball player, so always looked at cannabis as a way to kind of enhance, what you did. Was never kind of that typical lazy stoner kind of approach. We got involved, my wife and I, Sarah, got involved in the medical marijuana program pretty early, in Oregon, raising a family. I was a geologist by training, so I was doing permitting, environmental stuff, worked in the oil and gas and mining industry for a little bit, kind of built up the, this was, quasi even before it was legal and whatnot, the medical program and whatnot, but built that up over the years. And then when recreational started happening, had some experience with what was happening in Canada through my mining work. And we just saw the writing on the wall, Canada was going legal. There's a few states. Oregon was one of the first ones to go legal, I think, behind Washington and Colorado. So we started Grown Rogue in late 16, early 17. And just been kind of foot on the gas since then. Cultivation focus, very much into, flower and flower derived products. But yeah, long history in the space and been doing it as, the full-time job, since 2017, but has always been a big passion of our life and, kind of what we believe in.
Where did you play basketball and how did it help you enhance your basketball career?
So I played at Southern Oregon University, which was an NAIA school. My wife and I met through playing basketball. She was a D1 athlete, played college basketball at the University of Hawaii, and then came back to SOU, which is where she was from. That's how we met. It had pros and cons to it, right? Some of it was hey, all my friends were snowboarding and doing fun things, getting up early, going to the mountain. They were getting high, enjoying that, enhancing. I was getting ready to go to practice, have a game later that night. So it was kind of like a complementary piece to what we did. And then use that in kind of other activities and athletic endeavors, mountain biking, bunch of hiking. There's just a ton of outdoor kind of activities you can do in this region. So it's always been kind of a supplement and an enhancement to what we do, just in our daily activity.
So it seems like you guys are both pretty competitive. What's it like running a company together?
Oh, that's a great question. We don't have enough time on this podcast to go through all that. It's not easy, right? There's a lot of challenge. Your business and your life intersect in a way that it's hard to, break apart, right? And so, but we're both very competitive. And I think that's allowed us to kind of come to this holistic kind of alignment around what we're trying to build, what we're trying to do. And so it's very rewarding in a lot of ways. But, it's just hard to break that kind of life business separation. But Grown Rogue's kind of our life at this point, right? Our kids have grown up through this. We got 3 daughters. And so I wouldn't change it for the world. It's been a fantastic experience.
What were those first few months like when you started the company? I mean, you're coming up on your 10-year anniversary. Do you kind of look back and think man, how did we make it?
Sometimes, right? We're going back to the competitive nature of us, we're, our push for continued excellence and perfection is very strong. And so we never really sit back and kind of appreciate, what we did to get here. But we do step back every now and again and think about, geez, look how far we've come. The first few months were, the biggest thing was probably, cannabis has always been in that gray area. One of the things that was really important to us was, normalizing this in a way. But we were worried about what are our friends going to think? What are the parents of our kids' friends going to think? And so how would that kind of go through? And the reception was really strong. I think Sarah and I put a really good face on the industry in terms of, who we are as people. and cannabis just so happens to be our business. We provided a lot of education. People come to us when they're looking for like, hey, like I have sleep problems or I've got this. And so we've kind of become a trusted source of information. But, we do sit back and think, in the spare moments we get just around, what we've been able to build and the humbling that provides. And, mostly, David, it's around the team, right? Like these people we've been able to watch and kind of, a big part of our team started with us early. They've kind of moved up through the organization. So watching that progression and how it's changed their lives is not something we anticipated, but it's probably the most rewarding kind of outcome of, the business we've been building over the last 10 years.
How would you describe the grown rogue philosophy, and has that changed over the years?
It's a good question. Our philosophy is passion, genetics, flower production. Those are the things that we care about. And that's how we started it, right? Like when we started growing weed originally back in the early 2000s, it was because we wanted good supply for ourselves, right? Like it was really hard to get consistent supply. Like you'd get a really great, eighth or ounce or whatever you were buying. And then the next time it'd be something that was, you wouldn't even want to smoke it. And so we started growing because we wanted to fulfill that promise of consistent, high quality supply because people deserve that. And so that's been a really big part of who we are and what we want to do. That passion and that commitment has not changed. We've gotten distracted right as we started chasing things and, learning through the entrepreneurial kind of process. Like, we got into a chocolate partnership at one point. We've gone through all these different kind of distractions is the right way to describe it. But that core passion of flower, consistent, high quality supply, that's never wavered, never changed.
When you're chasing some of those distractions, like the chocolate partnership or another, how do you determine when like, okay, this isn't going to work?
Your biggest learnings come from failure, right? So, and also lack of passion, right? A lot of people got into this space. People get into any industry around, I want to make money. Like money doesn't lead, it follows. And, I realized really quickly, like, are we capitalized well enough to do this? Because you have business considerations. Can you afford it? Is there a market for it? But also, you got to have passion. Like, you got to have that inherent, like, I love what I'm going to do. Like, I still get excited to go into the grow rooms. I like seeing the product. I like just immersing myself in that. And so it wasn't easy to make that change and kind of step back from some of the, kind of the directions we had gone. But some of the best decisions we ever made. And I can't stress enough for people who are in cannabis, let alone any business, like passion for what you're doing is a critical portion of that success that you want to achieve.
How do you take that passion and the grow and continue to adapt and evolve to make sure, that passion is also turning into the most cost effective and best craft product?
Low cost is something that's not as important to the consumer, except for the fact that it allows us to offer really good pricing. And so that passion forces us, if we want to, exist in some of these more competitive markets, like we built our business in Oregon. It's one of the most competitive markets in the US. Our first expansion was into Michigan, which has gone through significant price normalization. In order to continue to provide that, high quality, consistent product, if you can't produce it at a cost that allows you to still stay in business, like you're going to lose that kind of, that directive that you set out for the business. And so low cost is a really important part of that. And something we hold ourselves to a high standard and are really proud of. We think, it's hard because there's not a lot of publicly available information on this, but we're in the top 1%, if not better than that in terms of indoor cost of production in the US. Like our costs are really, really good.
How do you achieve that?
Passion, controllables, focused on the things that we, are good at. Genetics is a big play on that, right? Like you got to get the right genetics that hit all of your different characteristics to get that consistency and quality that your customers are looking for. But also yield, right? It's got to yield because that helps with your cost of production. And we're super disciplined. We're not, like I'm sitting in my home office right now in this call, but like my main office is in one of our grow facilities, right? Like, so we don't have a bunch of high overhead, we're still running the day to day. And so we're really lean. And our team's really bought into that. They understand kind of that ethos from when we started the business and how we've kind of matured, and are really kind of embraced that. And that's just, we think about it a lot. We have great data to track it. We look at it on a very regular basis to kind of track costs. We're constantly figuring out how do we, cut, percents here, percents there. Like I tell the team all the time, like all the low hanging fruit, like we're not going to see a 30% improvement in some change, right? We're pulling the percent here, the percent there to keep driving that down. And it's part of our culture. It's a big part of our culture is cost discipline and cost control.
Equipment, automation, or any other technology play a role in staying lean and mean?
It's funny. We have a low cost and we have very little automation, right? We hand trim almost all of our product. We use knock boxes for our pre-roll production instead of these automated like full service machines. Our trimming rates are super high. Like our cost to trim is better than most machines can get because our team believes in that passion. That being said, we have good systems. I mean, we design, engineered environments to kind of mimic natural outdoor conditions in terms of temperature, humidity, all the environmental controls that go into producing a great product. Obviously that's automated. We're not in there with portable HVAC or whatnot. Like we have machinery to do that. But no, we found that with the right team and the right mission, right, you can achieve fantastic things. That being said, we're looking at some automation, like some of our packaging design as we move into the Eastern markets, things like that, things that are, the problem, not the problem. One of the challenges with cannabis is it's a biologic product, right? Like putting a flower on a certain genetic into a machine and expecting that to give you the right result. When you put a different genetic into it 10 minutes later, it's really hard to get that nuance, keep that character. And so things like that, we have a hard time automating because they're just machines are not, maybe with AI, it'll start to learn better, but it's really hard. Things like packaging a pre-roll tube, those are things you can automate and cut down costs and, things we continue to look at and kind of bring into our, organization to continue to drive that cost down.
With such a good team, what are some of the things that work for you to manage turnover?
We have really low turnover. It comes down to leadership. People have to care about the mission and the people that they're going to battle with every day. And we're very involved. I call it presence. We have a lot of presence inside of our facilities with our people. And it really comes down to the culture you establish. And I would say, Sarah's been probably the best at that in our company, like just her heart and soul and the way people respond to her has been huge in kind of establishing that apparatus is the wrong word, but just, how we communicate, how we talk, how we empower. We also do a lot of internal training, right? Like some of, I was talking about the humbling and most rewarding thing is watching our team, progress. But when people in an organization see upward mobility, we've been moving people to new states. We've been promoting them within to higher levels of responsibility. It gives you a sense of future and a potential opportunity in a company like this, which I think is really good for retention.
So you're currently in Oregon, Michigan, Illinois, and New Jersey?
Yep. And we're building in Minnesota. So we've got 5 states. Yep.
Well, that's one of the things I was curious about is how have you been able to scale these multi-state craft grows? And I think you kind of just alluded it to is promoting from within. Is it sort of taking the talent from Oregon and other mature states and seeding it where you're moving into next?
There's a little bit of that, right? And so, it's all about your organizational design, right? So as we started scaling, we started promoting our best people in the areas, the departments we call them. Like it's really 3 kind of main areas of our business. There's the cultivation side, what we call post-harvest, which is after the plant's been chopped down, like all the drying, carrying, testing, packaging, kind of manufacturing process. And then there's sales. So we elevated the best people in our company who are the most capable. Most of them have been with us my post-harvest VP of post-harvest has been with us since we started the company. 10 years, worked for us a little bit in the medical business. He's been around forever. The head of cultivation and sales have been here for 5 or 6 years. And so they elevated up to take on a more kind of corporate oversight, what's happening in our states. And then we do the same thing, we'll move people from Oregon into a new state. We will, we have a technical team now that we send out to do training, right, on like pre-roll production or, trimming or plant care inside the grow rooms. And so it's kind of a, internal stuff that we move, transferring SOPs, some of our internal talent. And then, you got to go find a new team. Like when we stood up Jersey, we now have 50 or 60 people that work there. Like you have to build that, you have to find the local folks. And the way to get them excited to kind of meet what our expectations are is training. Takes a little bit of time, but making sure your culture translates as well.
What do you look for in a market when you're deciding to move into a new state?
We're pretty opportunistic when it comes to new markets. It's got to be a market that's attractive to us in terms of, supply demand dynamics. I mean, we believe we can be successful in any market, but there's only so much bandwidth. And so would we choose to, put our energy and effort against a state like New Jersey, which is a little bit earlier, pricing's a little bit better. There's opportunity to establish your brand in a little bit more, rewarding way versus say Colorado, right? Those are the types of things we look at. And then it's got to make business sense. Is it on, kind of path? Like we don't go after a new market for like retail. Cultivation is kind of core to what we do. We're not opposed to retail under the right circumstances. And then, making sure we're not spreading our team out too much. Is this a brand new stand-up? Is this something we might acquire where it comes with a team that's already operational? And so there's a lot of factors that come into our kind of evaluation. But, after starting in Oregon, proof of concept in Michigan, right, our skill set would transfer. Jersey has solidified that, which is why we went after that recent acquisition in Illinois. And, we want a license in Minnesota, and that project is under active construction.
Well, so you've been in the New Jersey market for just over a year, right?
Yep.
So how were you able to kind of grow so quickly and continue to grow revenue? 50 people and some of the numbers that I saw out of the New Jersey market. Do you see that kind of success across all the states you operate in?
It'll vary based upon state. Timing of your market entry is going to be, really interesting. Michigan grew like that. We were really into Michigan. I think our first month there in our partnership, I think we produced like 30 pounds with the existing operation. We now do, 1,000 to 1,200 pounds a month over the last 4 or 5 years. So we continue to scale it. Each market will be a little bit different. We're also learning as we come into the Eastern markets. Oregon flower is not packaged in Oregon. Like you sell it in bulk. It's a deli style kind of consumer experience. So packaging, branding, things that we're investing more in and as we kind of move east. But yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into it. But the bottom line is, if you're efficient at what you do and you produce a product that customers want, you should have some measure of success. And then the question is, how long does it take to achieve that? Does that take 3 months, 6 months, a year? And that goes into some of our evaluation as well, is how long do we think it'll take to really activate this market to get it up to our standards? And so there's a process, but, we're pretty good at identifying, where we think where we can put the available skill set and the bandwidth we have into the right opportunities.
What is your current cost per pound?
We put out in our most recent earnings that our cost of indoor biomass is probably $225 or less, right? And so that includes trim, flower. Trim for us is a byproduct, and so we don't really think about that as much. So we normally think about like an all-in 4-well cost for indoor flower production. And that's just not COGS, right? Like that includes sales cost, administration inside that state. We're in the $350 range, something like that across Oregon and Michigan. A little bit more expensive in New Jersey, coupled with the fact that it's a more intense packaging environment, which raises cost to your, final product. And then two, the teams just, they're not at the standards we have in Oregon and Michigan because they've been operating for a year. Oregon's been operating for 7 or 8, Michigan for 5 or 6. And so, over time, that learning and, you just get more efficient as you go.
Well, and part of this podcast is to be educational for other operators out there. And, you talk about saving 1% here or there. Are there any low-hanging SOPs, so to speak, that, people could realize if they're just willing to put in the time and effort?
My experience with cultivation is everyone has kind of their own special sauce, right? I mean, there's the basics that are all the same. You take cuts, you veg them for a certain amount of time, you flower them under different conditions. And so it's really hard to kind of transfer what we do to someone else's kind of method because, it's like I call it the lever game. You can't just change the way you clone and not adjust, six other things in the continued process down the life cycle of the plant. Um, I think the most important thing for anyone, like cultivation included, is just, you got to have a team that believes in what you're doing and they got to be willing to commit and buy in. I mean, we do a lot of analogies from our sports background to like it's a team. Everyone's got a role to serve. And so I don't think there's any like one particular thing that's like, hey, do it this way and you'll be more efficient. It takes grit and intensity. And I think, some people have that, some people don't. I can tell you the most interesting, and this is where, we don't hide things, and this is starting to get pretty popular, but the most interesting technological improvement we've seen in cultivation is under canopy lighting, right? Demonstrable change in yield, quality, production. We started trialing those a couple of years ago. We've rolled that out into our almost entire facility in Michigan and starting to make those improvements into Oregon. And that's not a few percent change. Like it's a demonstrable change in terms of quality and that yield that you get out of that, which helps your cost and, helps your revenue and things like that.
Have you ever made a change from a cultivation perspective that you thought was just a slam dunk and didn't pan out?
Of course. Nothing I can think of like in particular, just because we're usually pretty disciplined around the changes we make. And, I come from, kind of mining, oil and gas, where like incremental change is really hard. And like one of the last companies I was involved with was trying to change the way people drill. Right. And they're very cautious to implement new tech. And so they test it and R&D it. So there's very few things that we would not test first before we would deploy. And so there's nothing that's been, and we've done a lot of testing, right, that hasn't worked out, but never, we don't ever take like, oh, we think this will work and we roll it across our entire facility. Like we don't do things like that. And so there's never been like like, oh my gosh, we made this change and it was like a complete failure. Let's stop it. That being said, like you learn a lot, like, and especially earlier in my career, like, how do you dry things properly? Right? Oops, the power went out and your dehumidification broke and you didn't check it. And then you got a bunch of mold in your dry room. And so you put redundancy in, right? And so you learn things like that. And so a lot of it just, it's experience that you get over the years. And 20 years in, 25 years into growing cannabis, like, I probably take for granted a little bit of that just wisdom and experience you get over those years. But at this point, we're super disciplined around new tech, new testing, because you really can't afford to make, I look at it this way. We can take bets on things that are outside of our wheelhouse and afford some level of failure and, like, oh, that didn't work. But like standing up a cultivation facility, we've done that so many times now, like that's not something we should miss, right? We should hit that with a high degree of confidence. If we screw that up, it's like, God, we've done this 4 times. Like, what's wrong with us? But like, right now in Oregon, we're trialing a cartridge, right? So again, we're very flower focused. We wanted to put a cart into the market because we have great brand reputation. We have great distribution across the retail centers here. But I didn't go spend a bunch of money standing up like a cartridge business. Like we found a partner. They're going to make a small number of cartridges for us. We outsource that to them. They send it back to us, and then our sales team sells it. But it was a small investment, right? And then we'll watch that grow, because I think one of the things a lot of people have made mistakes in cannabis is assuming on a spreadsheet that you're going to produce all this stuff at this cost with this kind of return on investment, forgetting the fact that if no one buys it, none of that matters. And so, we could go faster in some of these things, but I'm all about making sure there's a market demand for your product before you invest heavily in technology improvements and scale.
Well, making sure that there's a market demand, but how do you also make sure that when you launch a new product, you don't potentially put the rest of your brand at risk?
It's we have 2 main brands and then a third brand that's kind of like our premium that we're kind of going through recrafting on. The same thing, it's internal testing. Like when we did this cartridge test in Oregon, like we sampled it, we brought it back to our team, we had our team consume it, like we made tweaks to it, we put it out into the market with some of our buyers and customers, like, and so there is like a a market fit thing there. And then we are super disciplined. Like, so we and I'm just focused on cartridge because this is the newest kind of product we did. We launched a 510 thread and an all-in-one, right? Looked at the market and said, okay, let's do like a 50-50 or something between those two different types of this cartridge with the same material in it, just based on what consumers are looking for. Got the 510. Everything was, we had tried them, we had sampled them, we had tested them. We're like, all right, let's go into production, run a small batch, do like, I don't know, 10,000 cartridges or something like that. Got the 510s back. Perfect. Everything consumed right. Again, we tested it when we got it back from the manufacturer in our first kind of production scale. The all-in-ones were not smoking properly. And we didn't just launch those into the market. We held them. We went back to the manufacturer, said this doesn't meet our spec. And so you have standards that you set there, and you don't put out an inferior product, because again, you get one chance to create a new customer. You might get two chances before you lose a customer, right? So quality standards, Q&A, making sure what we put out is super important to maintaining that brand trust that we built, and is very critical for the future of our success, because our customers are our biggest judge of what we do. And I don't care how good we think it is or how worried we're about, like, oh, we need to make payroll or this money the next week. Like, if you don't keep your customer happy, none of the other stuff matters.
What went wrong with the all-in-one?
It was like too thick, maybe. So it wasn't pulling properly. And so the team tried it. Actually, I take that back. They had filled it in properly. And so and again, this is beyond my technical knowledge, but like the wick didn't get saturated. And so it wouldn't pull, or it didn't taste right. Like, there was something in there when the team sampled it. They're like, this doesn't meet our standard. We can't launch this into the market. And so I think we sent them back. They pulled out the oil, reinserted it, brought it back to us. We're like, all right, great. This is, up to our standard. And then we launched it into the market with really good kind of, response. And, we're starting to escalate that business a little bit inside of Oregon.
What are your three brands? You have Yeti, and what are the other two?
So Yeti is kind of our value brand. Grown Rogue is kind of like our core brand. And then we have a brand called Reserve, which still has the Grown Rogue logo on it, which is kind of like our premium brand. And that brand exists in New Jersey, where there's kind of a room for those three different kind of brands inside the market. As we learn more about branding, and, I talked about on the last earnings call, we just hired Laura Stensgaard, who's our new chief marketing officer. We've been really a sales-centric kind of sales-focused organization, but understanding the importance of brand. And if you can take our quality and consistency and, all the passion that we have and put a good brand around it, which very few people in flower have been able to achieve, there's a real opportunity there. And so Reserve is kind of that premium, which we're going to redesign that, right? And so we're working on probably a different name, still within the Grown Rogue family, but we'll have a separate kind of name and kind of design and kind of look and feel to the, the packaging and the design around that.
How'd you come up with that name, Grown Rogue?
So I told you we're from Oregon. We're based in the Rogue Valley, right? And so Rogue meant something on that from where we're from. That was number one. Number two, we're in cannabis, and so a rogue is potentially a little bit of an outlaw, puts a little bit of an edge to and we're in cannabis, so we're like, okay, that kind of fits. And then the third thing, which I would have liked to say I was aware of before we made the name, but I didn't. I learned this after the fact, but it goes right to the core of who we are, which is kind of cool. Rogue is actually, the verb is an agricultural term called you rogue a crop. And what that means is you're removing all the negative aspects. Like, you're taking out plants that are not meeting your expectations. Like, you're kind of culling things to make your crop fantastic. And so when I learned that one, I was like, man, this is the perfect name for what we're doing and what we're passionate about.
Oh, no, revisionist history. You lead with that one. Well, first and foremost.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Do you have any fears that craft cannabis will suffer a similar fate that craft beer is experiencing right now?
In terms of oversupply? Or lack of consumption?
Both.
No. Yeah. So we're already going through that, right? We already got oversupply. And so craft beer was a response to, the domestics that were dominating it. And it started in the 80s. I actually spent a lot of time with Deschutes, which is a local Oregon brewery, which I'm not sure if you're aware of, but they're probably a top 5, top 6 craft brewery in the US. And so I looked to them for kind of, facility design. Like we had an early investor at Deschutes. And so I think from a competitive standpoint, we're already there. Like cannabis is super competitive. There's a little bit more regulatory restriction in some of the states, and every state's a little bit unique, but like it's already super competitive. As far as consumption, one of the reasons alcohol is seeing declining share is kids and people are getting smarter around the impacts of that and overconsumption, just health issues. Two, I think cannabis has taken some of that share. It's a more healthy alternative. And so what we're looking at more is, how do we make sure our form factors continue to meet the demand of the new consumer, right? And so, flower still is king in most markets. We're seeing a little bit of a shift towards convenience, which is why we've been accelerating kind of our pre-roll production, right? Because people want to be able, it's not the old days when you didn't have like pre-rolls and vapes and things like that. You kind of had to get flower and, do what you had with it. But flower is still a really popular form factor in the space, but definitely understanding convenience. People want to go in, they don't want to grind it up, roll their own. So making sure we're kind of, staying on top of some of those changes in consumer behavior and what they're looking for. But time will tell. I think people, 10 years ago said flower was going to go away. Like no one's going to want flower anymore. It's going to be carts and beverage this, beverage that. And flower is still king in pretty much every single market in the US. And so we expect it to stay that way.
Was everybody saying that, the ones that weren't familiar with the current clientele?
It's funny. It's a great question. I mean, this is one of the things we all had to learn. It was hard for Sarah and I think it was hard for some of the people on our team, but we all thought the new market was this kind of more professional, they call it the soccer mom or whatnot. Like that's who people wanted to target. And they just they didn't really understand who the consumer was, like the clientele. Like that's just, most of your kind of heavy consumers are kind of college age, like going up into, kind of late 20s, 30s, whatnot, like when you look at the demographics. And so there's, but then again, there's clients like, like I think women may want more edibles because it helps with sleep for pain management. Like elderly are looking for edibles for sleep. And so there's a different form. That's one of the beauties of cannabis is it's so wide reaching. It has like really proven medical benefits, right? Like if you aren't sleeping well and you take a gummy, it's probably going to help. It's recreational, right? Go to a concert and take a pack of joints and like it's just going to enhance what you're doing. So it's just got such a broad kind of appeal, across. And you're watching, there's more and more people consuming cannabis every single day, it feels like. As the stigmas go away and some of the taboos, and they get comfortable, right? It's hard because you've been told your whole life, oh, it's a drug, dare, all these things. But then you try it and you're like, man, I didn't wake up hangover. Like I had a great conversation with my spouse or my friends. Like it's starting to become much more mainstream, which is really exciting for just, I think, people's access, let alone like just, the access and just kind of normalization of this product inside of our country.
You mentioned the acquisition in Illinois. You leased a facility in the state last month.
Yep.
How are things going in Illinois?
Good. So teams on like, full force to get kind of operational and all the technical things that need to get completed. And then working with the state and the local community to get all the licensing and, all kind of the administrative stuff you have to do. So feeling really confident around it. Things are hard to predict, especially as it relates to like regulatory process, how long that's going to take. Technically, I think we're in pretty good shape. But, we got to get, Department of Agriculture, kind of approve the new submittals and the plan, the new license that we acquired as part of this or are acquiring as part of this. And so, pretty excited and, still think we're launching, sometime in Q2 with, sales hopefully in, Q3, Q4, like we talked about.
I understand that a facility can be turnkey, but you're still turning the lights on somebody else's facility. Have you had any problems kind of bringing that to your standard?
We did a lot of due diligence on the facility before we got into it, right? So we understood some of the dynamics of what they're working with. It's unless you build it yourself, and even when you build it yourself, you're like, oh, that's not quite to my standard. I wish I'd have done this a little bit differently because there is no like, silver bullet for you do it exactly the same way. And so we knew going into it, some of the improvements we're going to have to make, a couple of them around lighting, a bunch of the lights there were kind of blown out and we're not getting to the par levels we wanted. And so we'll do some lighting replacement. Their fertigation system was too simplistic for us, so we're adding some more valves to allow us to be a little bit more genetic specific in how we irrigate and put fertilizer into the plants. And then the big thing is you meet the building where it's at. My VP of facilities coined that, and I was like, I love that, right? Like, here's the building, here's what it can do. Meet the building where it's at. And we'll adapt to some of that and then decide, hey, is it worth spending more money because we want a little bit more HVAC? Sure, maybe in the future, but we will adapt kind of growing practices a little bit, plant counts and density to make sure that we can grow the quality we want inside of the building that we've kind of are occupying now.
I really like that. Meet the building where it's at. I think that's
loved it.
Yeah. I read it, and I could have these numbers wrong. So in New Jersey, I had read that you were doing 500 pounds a month and selling 600 pounds a month. 80% of what you were selling was your own product. How are you having such success moving your own product in New Jersey?
Yeah, so we're producing between 500 to 600 pounds a month. Okay. That's kind of the average of production. It took us a little bit to ramp. And so when we were selling a little bit more than we were producing each month, it's because you're selling through inventory. You produced in a month where you didn't quite sell that number. And then I think in Q4, we were 95% packaged product. And so we only sell our own product, right? But 95% of it was literally in a package that goes to a retailer in our brand. And then there's a small amount that we would sell to another brand, what we call bulk, but a very small percentage. It's our quality's there. Our pricing's right. Our brand is strong. We built the right relationships. And again, it went slower than I wanted. Like I wanted to be at full sell through in the first 3 months, which is just, going back to our competitive kind of nature and how we push. But really pleased with kind of proof of concept into this new market, constructing a new project, getting it up and operational, getting it, kind of staffed and ready, getting our systems kind of deployed, and then watching the way the market has responded to our product. And, we won second place in one of the competitions there, both for a pre-roll and a flower product, which was pretty exciting. So you're starting to see the quality of what we bring. And just getting really good consumer response to kind of our brands and, the way we service it. We're throwing kind of our first brand party coming up in early May at NJ Unpacked. So that'll be another chance to introduce more people to who we are, what we do, the quality of our products. So just, integrating with the community, spending time, that's what it's about. It's a relationship business. And the team's just really executing at a high level.
Of the products that you've launched over the 10 years, what's been your favorite?
Oh, flower by far. If you want to get to I'm kind of liking the all-in-one cart just because it's kind of cool. It's a new product. I'm not really a vape consumer. But flower for sure. And then within flower is, there's been different genetics over the years that kind of stand out. Like right now, probably one of my favorites is called Triple Bean, which we've been growing in New Jersey for a little bit and then having some of the other states. Just a really great bag appeal. It's got great nose. The experience and kind of the high is really, really nice. And then I won't talk about some, we always have new R&D coming out, and that's where the real excitement gets is what's new, what's coming next, what is the team working on that'll be in production, 3 to 6 months from now. But flower is, that's why I got into it. I just love flower. Don't smoke or consume as much as I used to when I was, 20. But like walking into the grow rooms, being in the trim room, that's the passion. Our team to a person just really loves great flower.
Have you ever fallen in love with flower in the R&D phase that you thought was going to be a hit and consumers just didn't respond?
All the time. Like I had to get, this was probably a couple of years ago as we really, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, one of the big shifts we made in 21, 22 was how important genetic planning was and diversity was going to be. And so we have a really strict kind of process there for how much of any one strain we grow. The problem with flower is it's new, right? And so anytime, we call it a hot six, so pretty much, probably 4, 5, 6 rooms a year, we'll grow new genetics on a dedicated bench with 6 strains, because normally it's 1 strain per bench. And I had to remind the team, because we'd grow something in that hot 6 or that test concept, and be like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's like so good. It hits all of what we want. And then we put it into production and we get the first kind of production scale harvest and be like, like this doesn't remind us of what we thought. And part of that is you just got to be diligent and not let that newness kind of really, overcome like your sensibilities. So making sure sales is involved in that, making sure there's a little bit broader kind of, distribution of that. And then coupled with the disciplines, like it's not like if we get something new, we go 30% of that product in our profile, right? Like we'll usually slow roll into that unless we're really confident. But ends up, maybe max strain in one of our facilities is, there's outliers always, but 6%, 7% of production. So even if you lean into it and you're like, the customer doesn't like it, you can usually get rid of it without too much impact, right? Like there's usually some demand for that. You overgrow things sometimes, they're a little aged, but then it just comes down to price, right? If you have something that is not as desirable, I tell, my team all the time, like, and we have very good inventory turnover. It's a really important part of our business is the flywheel, we call it. But anytime, there's little we'll see little ups and downs inside of that. Some days we'll have 2 days of inventory, some days there'll be 10. And when you start to get a little more inventory, I'm like, I can make one phone call and sell everything we have for $1, right? Everything, $1. I could probably sell it for $2, probably sell it for 100, right? And you just walk your way up and then you say, okay, here is the sales price. And you hit that price and you move on.
Yeah. You had mentioned MJ Unpacked. What are your expectations for the show this year?
Really excited for it. They put on a great kind of just event and, our team will be there. I was going to try and make it out. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it out in early May. I think it's like the 5th or the 6th. But yeah, super excited for it. I think I've been to 1 or 2 in the past. Mostly excited about just, it's our first chance. We're kind of a year into New Jersey. Like we're going to throw a pretty awesome party and get people to come out, have fun. There's going to be food. There'll be product, drink tab. Like we're going to have a tattoo artist. Like it's going to be a chance for people to kind of just, the day-to-day is a grind, like step out of that, enjoy it, reflect a little bit, hang out with your friends, socialize, see some of our new products. So yeah, really excited about that, but it's going to be a great show. And, the conference is always good. I think there's an after party the next night that's kind of more formalized with like the MJ Unpacked and how that goes. And so we'll attend that as well. But yeah, really excited about it. It's going to be fun.
Do you still get a chance to play basketball?
My 2 of my daughters play basketball. And so I'll go and shoot around with them and, do a little bit of moves and things like that. I don't like play up and down anymore, but I'll still shoot, 3 or 4 times a week after going to the gym. That's probably the last thing to go is the shot, stays, dribbling, stamina, all the quick twitch muscles. And then when I'm lucky and, Sarah's at the gym with me, which is not as frequent as we'd like, we usually try and get a game of pig in, just to make sure, who's got the, who doesn't have to do dishes that night or something like that is what we'll pay for.
Do you know who's up in the standings?
Probably Sarah. I mean, she's a P1 athlete. And so, but yeah, no, she was a hell of a basketball player and still a fantastic athlete. Like, I mean, she is like, and if you ever talk to her, like physical fitness and just, her care for her body and that kind of thing is really important. But yeah, just super disciplined when it comes to that and still very, very active. It's awesome.
Obie, I really do appreciate it. And I hope I do have a chance to talk to Sarah sometime in the future. But before we get out of here, is there anything else you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience either knows about yourself or your work at Grown Rogue?
Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I think just like passion for the product, right? Like, consumers deserve freedom of choice, making sure they have access to that, not trying to gouge them. And just be really like passionate about what you do. Stay focused, stay disciplined, and you'll have a lot of success. And so, yeah, I really appreciate the time and the great questions. And yeah, I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Well, thank you again, Obie. I really do appreciate it. Before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you consume the podcast. If you'd like to email me, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You could also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Obie Strickler, CEO of Grown Rogue, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we will see you next week.
Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
All right, man. What'd you think?
That was awesome. I thought your questions were fantastic and on point. So, and I loved it wasn't like scripted,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
You heard about my basketball thing and you went into questions like it was just, anyways, I love conversations like that when it's not just like, all right, here's my questions. I'm going to ask them one after another. And it was just, yeah, very kind of organic. And so, yeah, really appreciate it. That was fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you. You made it easy, man. Like it was great.
Good.
Oh, yeah. Let's get it on the books. I'll shoot you an email back with some dates.
Thanks, David. Thanks,
Yep,
Francesca. Bye.
All right. Bye, guys.